So thank you guys for coming out today. This is my first time here at the beer school, and looks like a really neat thing. I didn't even know we had the other bar over here, so I was pleasantly surprised when we opened this room up. And so I came in from Dallas, was in Kansas City on Monday. I was catching a little 4 a.m., and then I caught a 6 a.m. flight and spent a day in KC, spent a day in Springfield. Nice spring weather. Then I came up here and it started raining, but it cleared up right after I got done working, in the market and getting in and out of the car. So got rained on all day, but. I've been I've been working for D&V for about a year and a half. Before that, I was the beer manager at a distributor in Alabama. We were a statewide distributor. Then they put me in charge of grocery wine for about 6 months, and I hope you never have to see new item maintenance on Publix's website because there's an 80-page instruction manual. So I started calling suppliers, and here I am. Been in Dallas for about a year and a half now, and it's not bad, go Stars. Yeah. So here we've got a couple different breweries here. We've got the St. Bernardus. We've got the Verhaeghe. We're gonna have some fun tasting some beer today. Had a little adventure in Springfield yesterday. I think that we stopped in and got an order from somewhere, and they had 4 shoplifters in 10 minutes. Somebody got out with a bottle of liquor, and then someone got out with a full cake from the bakery, and then they locked the front door. And then the guy's like, "Why can't I get out?" And he's like, and the manager's standing there. He's like, "'Cause you're fucking shoplifting." Guy's like, "No, I'm not." And I'm like, he's like, he has a bag of chips under his jacket, and the guy just pokes him in the bag of chips, and he goes, "What's that?" He's like, I don't know how they got there." He's like, "Give it up." "Now, where's the bottle of liquor?" He's like, "I don't have a bottle of liquor." He's like, "Where's your buddy?" I don't know. "Get out of here." His buddy walks up, can't get out. "Why can't I get out?" "'Cause you're fucking shoplifting." So that was our Springfield adventure yesterday. But it's good to be up here in St. Louis, and I think we're getting some beer poured out, some samples going. So cake. I mean, I don't even think he got it under his shirt. I mean, big cake. So. That was quite the adventure. That was the Price Cutter chain. Yeah. So then we went to the Flea, which was a cool little dive bar, and then a guy face planted, and it was a good 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But so we've got the samples coming out. I guess the first beer we're going to taste is the St. Bernardus Wit beer. So this beer is actually owned, the recipe is owned by St. Bernardus. So St. Bernardus is in Watteau. You've got West Flutterin right down the street. You can take a bike there if you ever get a chance to visit the property. They've got a really nice bed and breakfast that you can stay at. They keep like mini fridges in the room stocked with St. Bernardus beer, no charge. But the St. Bernardus Wit recipe was actually formulated by Pierre Celis. So maybe y'all remember Celis White being in the market. He actually formulated Hoegaarden originally and sold that recipe to InBev, AB InBev. And so when he sold that recipe to them, we'll say that they scaled it or changed it to scale it or bastardized the recipe. But when that happened, he went and actually made this recipe with St. Bernardus. So St. Bernardus ended up acquiring the recipe, and so this is going to be the St. Bernardus Wit. It's 5.5% ABV. Just a really more traditional wit. You've got that, that more of that tart kind of character to it, and it's really just a classic example of what the style is supposed to be, rather than a shock top or a blue moon or the modern version of Hogarden.
Well, in summer school, we do things a little differently. We do beer by style instead of by brand. So one of our classes, we do it all blind, so nobody ever knows what we're tasting. So we did a wit class last summer, and this was one of the wits that we tasted, and I think this is the best wit in the world, personally. Not just saying that because you're here either, right? Really not.
He always keeps it on there.
That's true. So Shock Top was one of the other ones we tasted, and Shock Top was Daniel's favorite wit beer. I mean, over like Unibrew, what was the other, I don't remember, the third one,
Oh, that's good. He and I both, in the master class, got growlers of this in dry hop.
That's true, we did.
And they were awesome.
Anyway, I was going to
And
share.
they cost $35.
I just want to do embarrassing.
And then I do it.
Okay, he's trying to change the subject already. What do you guys think of this beer? I mean, I'm curious.
This is my favorite wit.
Yeah, right. How about Shock Top? How many people have never had this beer before? This is their first time. What do you guys think? This is awesome. Oh, yeah. Do those people who are having it for the first time, have you had other wit beers that you don't like? Do you typically not like wits, or you do? Typically do, but this is exceptional? No? Yeah?
Thank you, Jen.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess I will
Guys, a little bit about the history of the St. Bernardus Brewery. St. Bernardus is not by any means a Trappist brewery, but it does have its roots. It is rooted in the history of two other Trappist breweries. So in the early 1900s, there was a lot of anti-clerical sentiment in France, and at that time, the monastery moved across the border to Poitou, to Belgium, and they were a cheese-making monastery, and so they actually founded the property. It was called Refuge de Saint Bernard. It was their refuge, and they began making cheese there. They did for a number of years until the early 1920s, when that anti-clerical sentiment had died down, and they ended up selling the cheese-making property and moving back to France. And so then the beer history really comes in 1946. So you guys may or may not be familiar with West Flutteren. Beer Advocate, I think, has it as the #1 rated beer in the world right now. It's the harder the beer is to get, the higher the rating. But it is very good, and I've had it. But they did that U.S. release through Shelton Brothers a couple years ago, and they did they were fundraising to get a roof for their monastery, and so they did a limited release. They were about $85 a six-pack retail, came with 2 glasses, commemorative, and they sold out, instantaneously. But St. Bernardus actually contract brewed that beer, and they actually did the 6, the 8, and the 12. So the Patter 6 we do not have here today, but so they actually contract brewed for 46 years for West Flutteren. So until 1992, they actually brewed under they just brewed commercially. West Flutteren didn't want to market their beer. They didn't want to be in charge of the commercial production and distribution of it. And so their brewmaster came over with their yeast strain, the St. Sixtus yeast strain. And so the beer was actually brewed as St. Sixtus de West Flutteren. And so that was just to indicate that it was brewed at the other facility, and they only continued to brew at the monastery in very limited quantities for the monks and for like 3 local accounts in the area. But any of their commercial production was done at the St. Bernardus property. And so in 1992, in order to keep the Trappist designation on the beer, they had to bring it back in-house. So at that point, St. Bernardus worked out with them to keep the yeast strain in the recipes, but they had to change the label. And so at that point, St. Bernardus, kind of as we know it these days, was born. And then in 1996, probably not by choice, West Fluttering ended up having to change their yeast strain. So they moved away from the St. Sixtus yeast strain. So if you actually look at the beer being produced by St. Bernardus in those 3 styles, are the original versions of the West Fluttering beers. So pretty neat. Beyond that, does anybody have any questions? I guess I'll tell you a little bit more about me, because I'm so fascinating. So I guess I started working at a liquor store to get in the industry. Met the distributors. It was a good way to go. Worked for a couple of crazy Iranian guys that told people they were from Azerbaijan, and I don't know where they were from. They lied to everybody that walked in the door. It was pretty interesting. They paid cash and, didn't ask any questions. And then I learned how to do plumbing. Pour concrete. This is all at the beer store. Learned how to do tile. So it was, no workers' comp. It was pretty interesting. I was there for about 6 months till I got on with the distributor. So that was a pretty good introduction to the construction industry and the beer industry. They didn't like shoplifters either. No, they had their own method of dealing with them. It involved physical abuse in front of the customers. But yeah, so that was a good time, if you will. And gosh, let's see here. We used to sell. So y'all know B United. I guess maybe not. So like Einbecker, Reisdorf, Kolsch, Aventinus used to sell those beers. But now, I was just kind of killing time until we got the new beer passed out, I gotta be honest. Now we're moving on to St. Bernardus Prior. So this is a Belgian double, so kind of cool thing. I talked to you guys about the Pater 6 a minute ago. So St. Bernardus actually classifies the Pater 6 and the Prior 8 as Belgian doubles. So they're pretty interesting in terms of them being on kind of opposite ends of the style guidelines. So if you look at like BJCP kind of style guidelines and you look at Belgian double, it's around 6.5 or around 6.5, 6.7% ABV to 8% ABV at the top end. And that actually, the Prior 8 that we're going to have is 8%. The Potter 6 is 6.7. So one's a little more, got a little more caramelization, a little more robust. The other has a little more of a nutty character to it. But it's just kind of fun that the brewery produces the same style and opposite ends of that style. So, if you guys get a chance to try the Pater 6, do you guys have that in the bottle or anything? Okay. So, but if y'all see it in retail or see it next week on the list, then please give it a try. It's just kind of fun to see and what the same brewery, same yeast strain, and just how different the beer can be. Patter is father. Prior is something that I should probably know. I won't lie to you. So, all right, so it's kind of interesting. So I work for a pretty small company D&V International. They really just started putting in a sales team nationally about 4 years ago because the beer, beer's gotten pretty different, pretty competitive. But it's really funny when you look at these Belgian companies and you look at, like we request information from them. It's pretty interesting, the sparsity of like sales support and like sales sheets and good information. So I'm actually really excited because in 2 weeks, I've been at the company for 1.5 years, and we've got Marco coming in from St. Bernardus. He comes in about 3 or 4 times a year to the U.S. for a couple weeks at a time, and he's our St. Bernardus brand ambassador. And I worked with another brewery that we have called Verhaeghe last year when they came to town, but I haven't had the opportunity to work with Marco. So I'm looking forward to kind of getting a little more of those details, just those fun facts, from working with Marco in a couple weeks. Really looking forward to that. And it's just funny, everybody's on Mañana. I mean, we've been trying to get one of our smaller brands. So when you register in different states, some states are really persnickety about the registration process. And so we have to have a chemical analysis sample of the beer submitted to like the state lab. And if it doesn't match up to like 0.1% ABV, of the label, it gets a fail. And then we either have to relabel the beer or submit another analysis. And it's a state-run lab, so it's not exactly efficient. So we've been trying to get this chemical analysis from the brewery just to submit to the lab for like months. And then you email them and they're like, yeah, we'll get it to you. And it's just like, no, not going to happen. So it's really interesting, when I get to work with some of these guys that come over, they just have a completely European outlook, and they're really easygoing and really just good energy folks. But sometimes when you're dealing with some of these smaller breweries, they're just not in that mindset, the American mindset of go and pushing this stuff. So it's pretty interesting working with this, just working with some of these suppliers. But how do you guys like the Prior 8? This one's 8%. Yeah, so the doubles are going to be right. So doubles are going to have dark malt. They are going to really, you can really kind of pick them out like as a double versus a brown ale just by like that level of caramelization that you get. It's pretty indicative of the style. When you get into the Belgian stuff, and you have Belgian singles, which are traditionally just brewed for the monks. They're low ABV in that 4 to 5% range. Pale malt, really still have a lot of character from the yeast, but very mild. And you don't see a lot of them commercially. The single style, we actually introduced Extra 4 to the U.S. as a Belgian single, I guess 1.5 years ago. But it's just not a common style, because once you get into shipping costs, margin for the importer, and then shipping costs to the distributor, and then distributor margin, and then retailer margin, all of a sudden you've got a $15, $16 4-pack of 4% beer. It's a lot more common to see that style in Belgium. The doubles, you're going to have that caramelization in that 6-7 to kind of 8% ABV. Belgian triples are going to be, you tend to get more of the fruitier, more of the fruit comes through on that pale malt. Longer fermentation time for the higher ABV, anywhere from like an 8 to 9.5% ABV typically. Pale malt, get kind of in those bigger, fruitier notes, similar to how you get the bigger notes in the Hefes and that sort of thing. some interesting esters from the yeast, and then what we'll have in a minute, the Abt 12 is going to be a Belgian quad, but these styles tend to correlate to ABV in the finished product, and in the brewing process tends to correlate to the amount of grain used in the base, because with more grain you're going to have more fermentable sugar, which is going to bring up the ABV. Now the fermentation process will take longer because you have more fermentable sugar in there. So we have another brewery called Verhaeghe, and they have a blonde ale and a triple, and they're the exact same grain build, exact same recipe. But the blonde ale, 6% alcohol, and takes 2 weeks less longer to ferment, and then they just use more water with the blonde. So on the triple, they use less water, so there's a higher ratio of grain and fermentable sugar. It takes 2 weeks longer to ferment to break down the sugar. And then it's 9% ABV. So it's just kind of a cool contrast there in how simple the beers can be, but how different they are just by affecting something like the water and the fermentation time. So this is the St. Bernardus Abt 12. This is a Belgian quad. It's 10% ABV. Wynn Westflutteren did their big release a couple years ago and then sold out immediately. We saw a nice sales spike because as the stores ran out, they were like, here's Abt 12. So this is our #1 selling beer in the country. It's our most popular. It's a really excellent example of the style, and it's a lot of fun. I guess this may be, if I were to survey the room, and ask folks what they had, this would probably be just, thing most people are familiar with from the brand if they're only familiar with one thing. It's delicious.
How many people have had this beer before?
Yeah. It's because
Like it? People that have not had it before? Really easy to drink, isn't it? 10%.
yeah, they use a little candied sugar, in there. Helps bring up the ABV while keeping that body really light, easy, smooth. If you had a 10% stout, you'd be chewing through it.
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot in class when we talk about Belgian beers that, the singles, double, the triple, the quad, all that stuff, it's not really, there's no math really involved in any of that typically. For most breweries. I think some there is, but typically speaking, there's not.
Easy guideline, you go on Google and you look around and it's like you have to piece together your information.
And not only that, but they're not going for, it's important to keep in mind that the idea is not about the alcohol content. That's just sort of a result of the fact that they supposedly doubled, tripled, quadrupled the amount of malt that's in the beer. So obviously the alcohol follows because of the sugar and the malt, but quad just refers really to the amount of malt that's added. It really doesn't have anything to do with the amount of alcohol. I mean, they obviously relate, but that's not.
Yeah, it tends to loosely correlate just because that's how it ends up in the finish.
Kind of my point when it comes to Belgian beers.
Absolutely.
That's why you get that dry, toasty, burnt toast.
Is there a limit to how high you can go? Can you have an octuple or?
Well, typically all right, so we used to sell a beer called Belzebub, and we still do, but it's now under a different formula. There's limitations in terms of the
Involved when you Belzebub was super interesting because it was 13% alcohol, but it was 100% grain on the build. So they didn't add any candied sugar. They didn't add any fermentable sugar to help the fermentation process. And so it's really difficult to keep the fermentation going once you hit about that 13% alcohol threshold, because the yeast has trouble digesting the sugar and getting, keeping the fermentation going. So a lot of times when you see these higher 20% ABV beers, they've got additives, not adjuncts, but they have additives in terms of like sugar added during fermentation to keep it going. So that was a really interesting beer, and it also, like, when you do an all grain on something like that, it really takes on its own character once you get to like 13%. I mean, the beer drank like a cognac. I mean, it didn't really taste like a beer. It tasted like a spirit almost. So, you know, you can go, I guess, as high as you want, but the question becomes a matter of chemistry and how are you keeping the fermentation going.
And after 15 to 16%, you're not going to have the N. Alcohol destroys the proteins that are going to actually fill the bubbles to form.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the highest I've seen this fermented is 27%.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know about adjuncts.
Right. Well, yeah, I've never had an affinity for home brewing. I think the only class I cheated in college was chemistry, and I still made a C. So that was just so I didn't have to take it again. Yeah, I mean the brewing. I mean the brewing science of brewing is just so chemistry driven. You know, when you want to get to the point that you don't have off flavors and your sanitation and I've just never had the mind for it. You know, I mean, I just want to talk about it and drink what other people make and do well. I mean, that's just my style. So, you know, cheers. So the next beer we've got coming out is from Brewery Verhaeghe.
Before you start talking about
Yeah.
this one, do you, it's something that I've been kind of curious about, and being an importer,
Mm-hmm.
and we've talked about the difficulty, you know, the importers have with competing with all the craft brands in the States.
Sure.
Obviously, you work with multiple importers, so you probably have some kind of insight. So while they're pouring this beer, would you talk about that for just a minute?
Sure. So, I mean, as some of you may know, I mean, I think like last time I checked, probably a year and a half ago, there were like 19
Craft breweries in the U.S. I live in Dallas now. I was living in Alabama, and I could make the same correlation there. Of the like maybe 14 breweries in Dallas, there's like 3 of them that I enjoy drinking. So it's not to say that all 14 of them don't have one beer that they're really good at, but you know, as far as sitting down and drinking through the whole line, there's some trouble there. So you know, I think that we definitely saw a dip in import popularity over the last 10 years, but I think it's coming back. It's slowly but surely. I think that there are a lot of phenomenal locals, and there's nothing better than getting a fresh local beer that's really on point, because I mean, you're not going to get an import beer that fresh, you know. So there's really nothing better, especially when you get into the hoppier IPA styles. But I think there's some disservice being done to the industry as a whole. When I went to the Craft Brewers Conference a couple years ago, the keynote speaker, the entire opening speech was quality, quality, quality. Stop brewing bad beer. And you're doing a disservice to the industry by brewing bad beer. And so I think a part of it is that people get in and they just don't have a background in the industry. They're passionate about beer. They may, you know, opening a brewery is expensive. So people may get over leveraged and maybe release something that maybe they should have just started over with the batch. So I think there's a lot of contributing factors, but I just think as a whole that it's back and forth. I think that we're seeing a trend back to imports because there's some styles that are not being done as well on the American side. I think I'm fortunate with Belgian beer. I think it's exempt from some of the fluxes just because I think they're harder to make. And I think if you get into sours, especially how sours are becoming popular across the country, I think Side Project does phenomenal sours. You know, I think they're one of the few American sour producers that I really enjoy drinking. No one does a Flemish red ale, and we'll get into why no one does a Flemish red ale in a minute, just because of how the yeast is indigenous to the area, and how expensive and time-consuming it is. When it takes you 18 months to make a beer, it becomes expensive. Yeah, I definitely think that everyone went kind of crazy on the American and local, and why not? You know, it was exciting and it's fun. But I do think that we're going to start seeing the cream rise to the top, and those people that are making phenomenal beer are going to be around, and those people that are, you know, not making the best beer are going to start struggling just with how crowded the market is. And you know, I think that on the import side, you've got the classic examples of the style, which is great. You know, that's what a lot of American breweries are emulating. So, you know, to me, it's sometimes like, well, why not just have the original version of that beer? But at the same time, you know, you're not going to find anything innovative coming out of Germany because of, you know, just the purity laws. So you're not going to find anything new, you know. So the Americans are definitely pushing the envelope, and that's cool, and that's fun, and that's challenging preconceptions. And you see Duvel buying Boulevard, but Duvel, you know, bought Boulevards. They can brew Boulevard and Firestone Walker in Europe and not have to pay to ship it. You know, the Europeans are clamoring for hoppy beer. So it's just kind of cool watching the consolidation, watching how the landscape changes, and being, you know, seeing it from the inside is really neat. So I think that we'll have, I think the landscape of craft beer will be completely different in 10 years.
So one more question before we get onto this beer. I'm curious, like, if you sit in meetings with like kind of bigwigs at your import company,
Mm-hmm.
like what they're telling you to do to make sure that these folks out here are buying the imported beer instead of buying the local craft beer. What are they saying about it? What kind of advice are they giving you to sell it?
Well, we're a small family-owned company, but I'd say we more have those kinds of conversations in like conference calls with the sales team and that sort of thing. You know, nothing frustrates me more than going into a bar and they only serve Texas beer, or they only serve American craft. And you know, my best question to them, if I can get away with asking them without offending them, is, well, what American beer or what Texas brewery makes a Flemish red ale? And the answer is none. And they go, none. And I go, well, why don't you pour 44 craft beers in one Duchess? You know, why would you box yourself out of carrying that style? And so, I mean, I know you can get an American quad from, you know, you get Reverend from Avery, but you can't get a Flemish red. So, I understand that people don't want to go away, especially in some of these areas that are like being gentrified, and it's local and it's farm to table, and it's, you know, that's their concept. So, you know, I mean, I understand not wanting to go away from your concept, but to me, it's, as someone that's passionate about beer, it's like, I don't care where it's from as long as it's extremely high quality. And you know, I don't want to drink, you know, a beer that got infected that someone was like, oh, I'm going to put fruit in it now and call it something else. You know, I mean, look, we came up with a sour on accident. It's like, no, you just didn't sanitize your equipment properly. So, you know, I have a problem with that. And I think that the best thing that we can do is get out and talk about it and educate the staffs at places that are savvy, and they can be our voice, like going, you know, when we're not around, because, you know, we are a small company, and, you know, I have 14 states. I can't come and talk to everyone all the time. So it really takes, but we also say that we don't want to be everywhere, you know? We don't want to be in places that don't make sense for our beer. You know, I don't want to be sold at Come and Go. You know, I mean, I secretly I do, but you know, we want to be, especially on the on-premise side. You know, I walked down to, I don't know what it was. There were girls in body paint, and I was trying to buy cigarettes. It was weird. Right down there. You know, I don't think that that's the best fit for our products. But you know, we want to be where it makes sense. I mean, I would hate to, you know, be in a place like this, and you know, someone that has a clientele for imported beer and is talking about beer and throwing beer classes, and I'd hate to not be in a place like this at all. You know, I mean, to like have like all of my competitors on and like none of my beer in, like that is what I'm here to make sure doesn't happen. I mean, like that's what my job is.
We're going to body paint next week.
Sweet.
We've got to figure out a way to compete.
That's right. That's right.
All right, you want to talk about the beer?
Yeah. So, Douchesse du Bourgogne. So, Brewery Verhaeghe. All right. So this is kind of interesting. So basically the owner of this brewery is in a wheelchair. He was, I guess, in a car accident when he was younger, so he doesn't come to the U.S. But he actually came over for the first time, I guess, since we had hired our sales team in the last like 5 years. So it was his first visit. He came over and was in Florida last week. And so for years, we've been telling people that this is an 8 and 18-month oak barrel-aged blend with Victonar, their other beer is the base beer, and apparently it's not true. So it does take 18 months to make. They do use giant like oak footers that are old use Bordeaux barrels. It's open fermentation. But I haven't really gotten the super technical specifics from that visit trickled down to me yet. So I thought I would tell you what I tell most of my retailers anyway. And so this beer is brewed with unicorn dust. The unicorns are overpopulated in the non-Muggle world, and so they actually issue hunting licenses. So the only way to not suffer a horrible half-life is to use the unicorn to make beer. And yeah, so it's magically delicious. We're waiting on that, you know, key to that. We're waiting on that license to run out from Lucky Charms. We don't want to get sued. But no, so this is it's a Flemish red ale. It's got that really cool kind of balsamic nose on there. It's got the malty, you know, balanced sweetness from the malt, but it's that it doesn't really linger. It finishes nice, so you get the you know, balsamic more on the nose than on the you know, on the back palate. Really versatile beer. One of our rep in Chicago recently did a big reduction with this, turned it into a glaze and cooked lamb with it. I mean, it's one of the most versatile beers that we have in terms of food and cooking. You know, I see it paired with like desserts, white fish that you would never think it would go with, and it's just like perfect. So it's definitely one of the just like the more fun things to experiment with. I was talking to one of the major brands reps today, and he was telling me about a barbecue sauce he makes with kind of like a little cinnamon and some other you know, other stuff for this you know, this like sauce he makes at home. And I was like, man, just pour a couple shots of Duchesse in there when you're doing the reduction. And he was like, yeah. And so I mean, it's just it would add some acidity to it. It's a really fun beer. People love it or hate it. I mean, this is not like one fun thing we do with this beer. Go ahead. Love it.
How many people love it? How many people hate it?
Yeah, why not?
I will tell you firsthand that I use beer a lot in cooking.
This beer makes an amazing vinaigrette, and you don't, it's like perfectly sweet and sour, like you don't add any sweet to it. Just a little tiny bit of Dijon mustard, good olive oil in this beer, and that's all you need, and it's freaking awesome.
Yeah.
So I've done it recently, and it's seriously amazing.
I mean, another thing about this beer is, you know, when you're like if you're doing a consumer tasting,
And I get somebody who comes up and they go, man, I only drink wine, and it's all I drink. And I'm like, do you like balsamic vinegar? And then they give me like this weird puzzled look, and they go, yes. 8 out of 10 people that 8.5 out of 10 people that I taste on this that are only wine drinkers love this beer. It's just like a good bridge to the wine drinker. I mean, it drinks more like a wine than a beer. I mean, what you would think, I've tasted plenty of people on this, and they go, that's not a beer. And they're like, they're dead serious. They're like, that is not a beer. I'm like, it's a beer. It just takes 18 months to make. So the brewery was actually founded in 1885. I guess World War I, there was a call to resist the Germans, and so they wanted to use the facility, I guess, for profit or something like that, and they refused. And so the Germans, thanked them for their refusal by melting the whole brewery down for scrap. And so there was no Verhaeghe for a little period of time. But really fun beers. The next beer we're gonna have is gonna be from them as well. Six. All right, so the next beer is Barbe Ruby. So we recently brought this to the U.S., I guess about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years ago. So fairly new to the United States. So what I really like about this beer is that it's all pressed fruit, all pressed cherries. There's no extract for flavoring. There's no puree. It's all fruit. And so you get that on the nose. It just smells like this huge, sweet, like fruit bomb. It's like very floral. And then the cool thing about it being pressed fruit is you get the acidity. And you get the acidity to back it up. And so, acidity is key, especially when you have that sweetness. And so it's really well balanced. I don't know if, when you get into these fruit beers, sometimes you get like a cough syrupiness to them. And so this isn't really going to have that because they did it the right way. They pressed the fruit. Another interesting and fun thing about this beer is that, you get into the lambics, you get into the fruit beers, you get into some of these, and, they're 3% alcohol, 3.2. This is 7.7. So definitely different in that style. It's classified as a fruit beer. It'll sneak up on you. Yeah. It's filled with happiness and brewed with unicorn dust. Yeah. Yeah. This is Brouwery Verhaeghe, but it's called Barbe.
But there's not a lot of draft available, so but if you guys like it, it's definitely worth getting because there's not a lot of draft available. You won't find it a lot of places, that's for sure.
Yes. Retail? Anywhere from 20 to 24 for a 4-pack. It means, I don't know the translation on that one. We do the Et Krieken beer, which is another beer, and it translates to true cherry beer. Right. Well, but we also do a stout with them called Barbe Black. Yeah. Barbe Black, black beer, red beer. They do one that we do not sell here in Missouri. It's called Echt Krieken beer. It's actually classified as a Flemish red ale as well. That one takes even longer to make than Duchess, so that's probably the only beer there is that we have stock issues with stateside running out. We get a healthy amount, but it's just not something we sell in Missouri right now. But it's like a Duchess treated with cherries, kind of. Thanks for coming out.